My step-parents called a family meeting 3 days before my flight abroad. My stepfather Desmond slid a thick leather folder across the mahogany table and said, "We need to restructure everything for your own good." I said nothing while their lawyer typed every account number into the system one by one. All came back empty. The lawyer turned the screen toward my father. He froze in absolute terror. My mother fainted. I smiled and sipped my coffee. My name is Morgan Ellis, and I am 31 years old. If you have ever been manipulated by toxic family members who only wanted to use you for financial gain, please hit the like button and subscribe. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Let me tell you how I burned their greedy scheme to the ground and took back what was rightfully mine. Growing up in Buckhead, Atlanta meant living in a world where appearances dictated your worth. After my biological mother passed away, my stepfather Desmond wasted no time moving his mistress Valerie into our estate. Within 6 months, she was upgraded from secret girlfriend to official stepmother. They transformed our home into a monument of their own vanity. Tonight was the perfect example of their endless greed. We were gathered in the grand ballroom of the most exclusive country club in the city to celebrate their 10-year wedding anniversary. The room was dripping with white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and an ice sculpture centerpiece that cost more than a luxury car. Waiters in uniforms circulated with silver trays of champagne and expensive caviar. 50 of the most elite members of Atlanta high society were chatting and laughing, oblivious to the reality behind the glamour. I stood near the edge of the room, holding a glass of sparkling water and watching them perform. Desmond was wearing a tuxedo, laughing loudly and slapping other men on the back. Valerie was draped in a designer gown and dripping with diamonds that had originally belonged to my late mother. They looked like royalty, but I knew the truth. They were spending money they did not earn. As the chief executive officer and founder of a high-end medical logistics and supply chain firm, I knew what hard work looked like. I had built my company from the ground up, turning it into a profitable enterprise. I also inherited a massive estate from my mother, a brilliant pioneer in the business world who made sure I was financially secure. I was worth over $60 million, but my step-parents treated me like a naive child who needed their supervision. The real reason we were all gathered tonight was not just an anniversary celebration. I was scheduled to leave for London in a few days to oversee a major 2-year expansion of my company. My bags were packed, my flights were booked, and I was eager to get away from the toxic environment Desmond and Valerie created. I had kept my distance from them, focusing entirely on my career and my late mother's legacy. However, Desmond had a different plan for my farewell. Suddenly, the classical music playing in the background came to a jarring halt. The heavy clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne glass echoed through the massive ballroom. Desmond stood at the center of the room, a charming smile plastered across his face. He raised his glass high, demanding the attention of every wealthy guest in attendance. Friends and family. Desmond began, his voice booming through the microphone someone had handed him. Thank you all for joining Valerie and me on this beautiful evening. 10 years of marriage is a wonderful milestone, but tonight we are also celebrating another special occasion. He turned his gaze directly toward me, and 50 pairs of eyes immediately followed. My heart rate picked up slightly, but I kept my posture straight and my expression carefully neutral. Our brilliant daughter Morgan is embarking on a new adventure, Desmond announced, gesturing for me to step forward. She is moving to Europe to expand her medical logistics empire. We could not be more proud of the woman she has become. The crowd offered a polite round of applause. I offered a tight smile, knowing Desmond never did anything without a selfish motive. He motioned to a waiter who approached carrying a silver tray. But instead of drinks, the tray held an ornate, heavy folder holding a stack of legal documents and a gold pen. Desmond picked up the folder and walked toward me, his smile never wavering, though his eyes were cold and calculating. "Morgan, darling," Desmond said, projecting his voice so everyone could hear. "We know you are going to be busy over in London. Managing a global expansion is a monumental task, and the last thing you need to worry about is the day-to-day management of your mother's estate and trust fund. He opened the folder and held it out to me. The bright lights of the chandeliers reflected off the crisp white paper. I glanced down and read the bold heading printed at the top of the page. Temporary Asset Management Authorization. I have had our family lawyers draft these documents, he continued smoothly. It is just a simple authorization that allows me and Valerie to handle the domestic financial responsibilities, pay the property taxes, and manage the investment portfolios while you are overseas building your company. It will keep the family estate secure and take all the burden off your shoulders. Just sign right here, sweetheart, and we can all toast to your future. He extended the gold pen toward me. The silence in the room was deafening. 50 members of our community were watching me expectantly, waiting for the grateful daughter to accept her loving stepfather's generous offer. It was a classic manipulation tactic. Desmond was using the social pressure of an elite public gathering to force my hand, assuming I would never cause a scene or risk humiliating the family in front of their wealthy peers. He thought I would blindly sign away control of $60 million just to keep the peace and avoid a public scandal. He stared at me, his charming smile masking a silent, aggressive demand to comply. I looked at the gold pen suspended in the air between us. The heavy silence of the ballroom pressed down on my shoulders as 50 pairs of eyes waited for my response. Desmond raised an eyebrow, his charming smile firmly in place, silently daring me to refuse him in front of Atlanta elite. I offered a warm, practiced smile in return, the kind of smile that revealed absolutely nothing of the anger boiling beneath the surface. I kept my hands firmly clasped around my glass of sparkling water, refusing to reach for the pen. "Thank you, Desmond," I said, ensuring my voice carried clearly and pleasantly to the surrounding guests. "It is incredibly thoughtful of you to worry about my schedule during such a demanding time. However, I have already arranged for a highly specialized wealth management firm to handle the trust while I am in London. I could not possibly burden you and Valerie with such a massive financial responsibility during your anniversary year. You two should be celebrating tonight, not doing my paperwork." I stepped back to create physical distance between us. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Desmond's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in his perfect facade revealing the frustration underneath. Before Desmond could formulate a counter-argument, a new voice cut through the tension. "Oh, come on, Morgan, do not be so stubborn." I turned to see Connor Davenport pushing his way through the circle of guests. Connor was my 30-year-old brother-in-law, a white finance bro who married my stepsister Jasmine 2 years ago. He wore a tailored suit that looked expensive but fit poorly around the shoulders, and he always carried himself with the unearned confidence of a man who firmly believed he was the smartest person in any room. Connor stepped up beside Desmond, puffing out his chest as he took control of the conversation. He looked at me with a deeply condescending smirk, the kind of look an exasperated teacher gives a slow student who just cannot grasp a simple concept. "Morgan, we all know you are good at what you do," Connor said, his tone dripping with patronizing arrogance. "But running a medical logistics company is essentially just moving boxes from point A to point B. It is operational work. It is blue-collar management dressed up in a corporate suit. Managing a $60 million estate is a completely different beast entirely. It requires real financial expertise. It requires a deep understanding of market fluctuations, asset allocation, and aggressive investment strategies that you simply do not possess." He chuckled softly, looking around at the guests to gather their approval for his blatant sexism and disrespect. "You do not want to hand over your mother legacy to some faceless corporate firm that will just treat you like another account number," he continued, stepping closer to me. "Desmond and I actually understand high-level wealth management. We know how to protect and multiply assets. Let the men handle the complex financial structuring while you go off to Europe and focus on your little delivery trucks." Right on cue, Jasmine appeared at Connor's side, linking her arm tightly through his. My 26-year-old stepsister was wearing a custom designer gown that I knew for a fact was paid for by the supplementary credit card tied to my mother's estate. Jasmine tossed her perfectly styled hair and let out a loud, dramatic sigh, making sure everyone around us heard her irritation. "Seriously, Morgan, you are always so paranoid. Jasmine drawled, rolling her eyes dramatically. You work yourself to the bone for absolutely no reason. Look at you. You are single, you have zero social life, and you are a total workaholic. You do not even know how to enjoy generational wealth. What is the point of having all this money if you are just going to stress over every single penny all day long? She leaned into Connor, presenting a picture of absolute entitlement. Connor and Dad are offering to do you a massive favor, she added, her voice raising in pitch. You should be thanking them on your knees instead of acting like they are trying to steal from you. Just sign the paper, go to London, and actually try to have some fun for once in your miserable life. She offered a sickly sweet smile, but her eyes were full of venom. They had clearly rehearsed this exact scenario, hoping to tag team me into submission while playing the roles of the caring, financially savvy family members. I looked at Connor, then at Jasmine, and finally at Desmond. They stood together, a united front of greed and entitlement, waiting for me to crumble under their coordinated public pressure. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It was not a loud laugh, but in the quiet ballroom, it echoed sharply. I took a slow step toward Connor, looking him dead in the eye, stripping away the polite social mask I had been wearing all evening. Real financial expertise? Connor, I asked, letting the words hang heavily in the air. That is a very interesting choice of phrasing. Please correct me if I am wrong, but does your specific definition of real financial expertise include evaporating a $2 million startup fund in less than 8 months? The ballroom went dead silent. The guests who had been pretending not to listen suddenly turned their full, undivided attention to our circle. Connor's smug expression vanished, instantly replaced by a sudden, chalky paleness. I kept my voice steady, conversational, yet loud enough for the prominent investors in the room to hear every single syllable of my response. Because last year I continued taking another step forward, you convinced my father to let you manage that seed capital for your revolutionary tech venture. And if I recall the forensic audit correctly, that money did not go toward market fluctuations or aggressive investment strategies. It went toward private jet rentals, luxury leased vehicles, and a series of catastrophic crypto trades that the Securities and Exchange Commission is still actively investigating. So tell me, Connor, is that the high-level wealth management you plan to bring to my mother's $60 million trust? Connor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. Jasmine gasped loudly, her face turning crimson with absolute embarrassment, as the wealthy socialites around us began to whisper furiously behind their champagne glasses. I watched the panic set into their eyes, knowing I had just exposed the very core of their incompetence to the exact people they spent their entire lives trying to impress. The whispers grew louder, filling the grand ballroom. Wealthy investors exchanged scandalized glances as my words sank in. Connor stood frozen, his face burning with humiliation, while Jasmine looked as though she might burst into tears. Before anyone else could speak, I felt a vice-like grip clamp down on my upper arm. Desmond dropped his host persona entirely, and his fingers dug into my skin with bruising force. He did not say a word to the crowd as he pulled me away from the circle of guests, dragging me across the marble floor, pushing through heavy double doors into a secluded private hallway. The doors swung shut behind us instantly, cutting off the music and gossip. Desmond released my arm, giving me a rough shove, forcing me to stumble back against the wallpaper. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored tuxedo as he glared at me with absolute fury. "How dare you disrespect this family in front of my guests?" Desmond hissed, his voice echoing in the corridor. "You have always been an ungrateful child, Morgan. But tonight, you crossed a line you cannot uncross." He began pacing back and forth, shaking his head, shifting effortlessly into the victim role he had perfected over 2 decades. He stopped and pointed a trembling finger at me, his face contorting into an expression of wounded sorrow. "I gave up the best years of my life for you," he said, his voice cracking with artificial emotion. "When your mother was lying in that hospital bed, wasting away, who was there every single night holding her hand? Who stepped up to raise you when you were just a terrified little girl, crying in the waiting room?" I sacrificed my own career to keep this family from falling apart. I paid the medical bills, I managed the household, and I made sure you had the foundation to build that logistics company you are so proud of today. You owe me your entire life, Morgan. Without my guidance, you would be absolutely nothing. He took a step closer, looking down at me with pity and disgust. And this is how you repay my devotion. By trying to humiliate my son-in-law and refusing to sign a piece of paper meant to protect your own future. You are acting like a paranoid lunatic when all I have ever done is try to love you as my own. I stood completely still, letting his pathetic performance wash over me, showing no emotion. I straightened my posture, matching his height. You really believe your own lies? Do you not, Desmond? I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. You have spent so many years playing the devoted husband that you have forgotten the truth, but I have not forgotten anything. I took a deliberate step toward him, forcing him to hold his ground. You did not pay a single medical bill? I continued, stating facts with icy precision. My mother paid for her own treatments using the fortune she built, while you sat in the waiting room pretending to be sad. And you did not sacrifice your career because you never had a real career to begin with. You were nothing but a failed real estate broker, living entirely off my mother and her massive success. Desmond tried to protest, but I cut him off, stepping closer until we were barely a foot apart. And do not ever talk to me about holding her hand in the hospital, I said, feeling cold anger radiating through my chest, because I know exactly where you were during those long months when she was going through chemotherapy. You were downtown at luxury boutiques using my mother and her credit cards to buy Hermes Birkin bags for Valerie. Yes, Desmond. I know all about the orange leather bag and the diamond tennis bracelet you bought for your secret mistress while your wife was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. You moved Valerie into our house 6 months after the funeral, but you had been sleeping with her for 3 years before that. Do not stand here in your tuxedo bought with my money and lecture me about sacrifices. The mask of the loving father melted away from Desmond and his face twisted into something vicious. The polite charm replaced by the cruelty of a cornered animal. His eyes darkened as he leaned forward, looming over me. He let out a low, humorless chuckle. You think you are so smart just because you run a supply chain company? He growled, his voice dropping to a whisper. You think you can pack your bags and fly to London and leave me dealing with the scraps? You are wrong. He reached into his tuxedo jacket pocket and pulled out the folded legal document, gripping it tightly in his fist. You are going to sign this authorization before you get on that plane, he stated as an absolute command. If you refuse to sign this tonight, I will make sure you never leave the state of Georgia. Desmond smiled, a predatory smile showing his teeth. You seem to have forgotten that when your mother passed away, the estate lawyers drafted a specific legal guardianship clause to protect your assets, he explained. It was an old legal loophole designed for beneficiaries demonstrating severe mental instability or erratic financial behavior. It has been buried in the trust paperwork for decades, but it remains valid. If you do not sign these papers now, I will file an emergency petition with the local family court tomorrow, claiming you are mentally unfit to manage the estate. I will use your refusal to cooperate as evidence of erratic behavior. The judge will grant a temporary injunction freezing your passport and locking down every one of your personal and business accounts. You will not board your flight to London. Your logistics company will be grounded. Your overseas expansion will completely collapse. I will tie you up in brutal litigation for the next 5 years until you are begging me for access to your own money. He tapped the gold pen against the paper of the folder. So you are going to walk back out into that ballroom? Apologize to Connor and Jasmine, and sign this document with a smile on your face. I stared at the folder in his hand, watching the gold pen catch the dim light. The threat hung between us, heavy and toxic. Desmond thought he had me backed into a corner. He thought his legal knowledge and aggressive posturing would break me down, just like he used to break down my mother when she was too weak to fight back. But I was not my mother, and I was no longer a child who could be intimidated by empty threats. I reached out slowly and took the leather folder from his grip. I did not take the pen. I will review it, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I will read through every page tonight, and we will handle this before my flight leaves. Desmond narrowed his eyes, searching for fear or submission, but found neither. Do not play games with me, Morgan, he warned. You know what will happen if you stall. I know exactly what will happen, I replied, turning my back on him. I pushed through the double doors and walked straight through the grand ballroom. I ignored the curious stares of the wealthy guests. I ignored Connor standing by the ice sculpture. I ignored Jasmine frantically whispering to a socialite friend. I walked out the front doors and waited for my car. I drove straight downtown to the sleek glass tower that housed my private legal counsel. I had retained this team 3 years ago, independent of the family lawyers. They were ruthless litigators and forensic accountants who answered only to me. They did not care about Atlanta high society. They only cared about airtight contracts and destroying anyone who tried to breach them. I parked in the underground garage and took the elevator up to the 40th floor. The office was quiet, but my lead attorney Marcus had assembled his core team the moment I called him. I walked into the conference room and tossed the folder onto the long table. Desmond wants me to sign this before I leave for London, I told them, taking a seat. He claims it is a simple temporary asset management authorization to handle property taxes and standard investments. I need you to tear it apart word by word and tell me exactly what poison he hid inside those pages. Marcus picked up the document, his eyes scanning the first few paragraphs. He passed copies to the forensic accountant sitting beside him. We will have answers shortly, Marcus promised. I poured a cup of black coffee and sat by the window looking over the city lights. It took them less than 2 hours to find the trap. Marcus took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked across the table at me with pure disbelief. You were right to bring this to us, Marcus said, his voice gravely serious. This is not a temporary management authorization. The title is just window dressing to make you feel comfortable. Buried on page 47 under a maze of dense legal jargon about fiduciary discretion is a cross-collateralization clause. I turned away from the window and walked back to the table. Explain it to me in plain terms, I demanded. One of the accountants slid a highlighted document toward me. If you sign this paper, she explained, you are giving them unilateral authority to pledge your entire $60 million trust fund as collateral for external debts. They structured the language so obscurely that any standard review might miss it. But the power it grants is absolute. They could leverage every single asset you own to secure lines of credit without needing your secondary approval. My blood ran cold, but my mind remained razor sharp. Why would they need that much collateral? I asked, looking at Marcus. Desmond has expensive tastes, but he does not need a $60 million credit line to buy designer bags. What are they actually trying to do? Marcus tapped his pen against the table. That is the exact question we asked ourselves. So we ran a background check on the recent corporate filings registered under your brother-in-law, Connor Davenport. The accountant typed a command into her laptop, and a corporate web appeared on the large screen. Your stepfather and brother-in-law formed a shell company 3 weeks ago in Delaware, she explained. It is completely insulated from your family estate, but they are listed as sole managing directors. We pulled the loan applications associated with this entity. They are attempting to secure a massive margin loan from a major investment bank. How much? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. $40 million, Marcus answered bluntly. They are trying to borrow $40 million in cash to purchase a speculative commercial real estate development on the outskirts of the city. We looked at the property details. It is a complete trash venture. The land is heavily contaminated, and zoning permits are stalled in city council. No legitimate financial institution would fund that project on its own merits, because the risk of total default is astronomically high. So how are they getting the loan approved? I asked. The bank is requiring a bulletproof guarantor, Marcus said. They need liquid assets to back up the $40 million. If the real estate venture goes bankrupt, The bank needs to know they can seize the cash immediately. Desmond and Connor are using this authorization document to pledge your $60 million trust fund as the sole collateral for their margin loan. I sat down heavily, letting the monstrous reality wash over me. They were willing to risk my entire inheritance on a doomed real estate gamble just so Connor could play the role of a big-shot developer. If I signed that paper, I would come back to find my mother's legacy wiped out and seized by the bank to cover their debts. They were going to sacrifice my future to fund their toxic illusions of grandeur. A calm, chilling clarity settled over my mind. They want to play high-stakes finance, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. Let us show them how it is really done. Get the paperwork ready. We are going to burn their entire scheme to the ground and leave them with absolutely nothing. I drove back through the dark, winding streets of Buckhead, the city lights fading into the distance as I approached the residential estates. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the family mansion. It was a house built on my mother's sweat and relentless ambition, now occupied by parasites who thought they had figured out how to drain the host dry. I bypassed the grand foyer, walking quietly up the sweeping marble staircase. The house was empty of guests, leaving only the suffocating presence of Desmond and Valerie lingering in the artwork they had purchased. I headed straight for the east wing, where my private suite was located. My only goal was to pack the last of my tailored suits and secure my travel documents before the final trap was sprung. As I walked down the carpeted hallway, I noticed the heavy oak door to my bedroom was pushed slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light spilled out onto the dark carpet. I pushed the door open completely, making no effort to announce my presence. Standing in front of my antique vanity mirror was Jasmine. The contents of my mother's private jewelry vault were scattered across the polished mahogany surface. Velvet boxes were ripped open and discarded. Heavy diamond tennis bracelets and emerald rings were tossed carelessly next to my perfume bottles. Jasmine was currently fumbling with the clasp of my mother's vintage Cartier diamond necklace. Jasmine secured the heavy platinum clasp around her neck and admired her reflection in the mirror, turning side to side to catch the light on the massive diamonds. Jasmine had been raised by Valerie to believe everything she wanted was simply hers. She did not flinch. She slowly turned around to face me, resting her manicured hands on the edge of the vanity table. "Oh, good you are back," she said, her voice dripping with that same arrogant condescension she had used in the ballroom. "I figured since you are packing for your little London trip, you would not be needing these for a while. It is a complete waste to leave such beautiful pieces sitting in a dark safe. I am just borrowing them." The sheer audacity of her trespassing in my sanctuary and pilfering the last physical memories of my dead mother sent a spike of pure, violent rage directly into my chest. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to cross the room and rip the platinum chain from her throat. But I forced my muscles to relax. I let out a slow, measured breath and locked my explosive anger behind a wall of impenetrable ice. Physical violence would only give them the ammunition they needed. I had to look at the bigger picture of their impending destruction. Besides, she continued waving her hand dismissively over the scattered velvet boxes, Connor is going to be controlling all the family accounts and safe deposits by the end of the week anyway. Once you sign those authorization papers for Dad, it all falls under our management. Connor already promised me I could have full access to the jewelry collection once the legal transition is complete. So really, I am just taking early possession of what is going to be under my husband's jurisdiction. You understand, right, Morgan? It is just basic asset reallocation. She smiled a sickeningly sweet smile, fully expecting me to scream or cry or throw a massive tantrum. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. I walked slowly into the room, closing the heavy oak door behind me with a soft click. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest, and looked at her with an eerie, terrifying calmness. I stared at the diamonds glittering against her skin, and then I looked directly into her eyes. "Keep them," I said, my voice perfectly flat and hollow. Jasmine blinked, her arrogant smile faltering for a fraction of a second. "What did you say?" she asked. clearly caught off guard by my complete lack of resistance. I said you can keep them. Jasmine, I repeated slowly, emphasizing every word. Take the necklace, take the earrings in your bag, pack them all up and take them to your bedroom right now. They look absolutely perfect on you. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, moving her weight from one foot to the other. My complete surrender unnerved her deeply. She had come into my room seeking a confrontation, wanting to assert her dominance and gloat about her husband's impending financial takeover. My cold, deadpan compliance was the exact opposite of what she expected, and it terrified her. "You are being weird, Morgan," she muttered, breaking eye contact and nervously touching the necklace again. "I am just borrowing them like I said." "No, I insist," I replied, my voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "I want you to have them. I want you to look at yourself in the mirror and admire those diamonds." I watched her hands tremble slightly as she quickly swept the remaining loose rings and bracelets off the vanity and dropped them into her clutch. Her greed was far stronger than her fear. She could not resist the allure of the stolen wealth, even as every instinct in my body warned her that my reaction was dangerously unnatural. She snapped her clutch shut and quickly walked across the carpet, giving me a wide berth as she approached the door. She reached for the cold brass handle but paused for a moment, looking back at me one last time, her eyes wide with a mixture of triumph and lingering paranoia. I stepped aside, allowing her to open the door. "Enjoy the diamonds, Jasmine," I said softly as she stepped out into the hallway. "They are going to be the most expensive mistake that you will ever make." She did not respond, but simply clutched the bag to her chest and hurried down the corridor, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood floors. I watched her retreat into the shadows of the massive house, knowing she was walking straight toward an absolute financial slaughter. Soon enough, the FBI would be cataloging those exact same diamonds as seized assets in a federal fraud investigation. I turned back into my suite and began to pack my bags with a small, cold smile finally touching my lips. The heavy oak door clicked shut, and the silence of my suite wrapped around me. I walked to my desk and pulled out my laptop. The anger simmering in my veins cooled into a calculated focus. It was time to shift into the next phase of my strategy. Desmond and Connor relied on intimidation, but I operated on precision. I opened a secure audio recording application and linked it to my phone line. Every word spoken needed to be captured with absolute clarity. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump forward. I deliberately relaxed my vocal cords to make my voice sound raspy and defeated. I needed to play the role of the exhausted daughter who had cracked under the pressure of his manipulation. I pressed the call button and listened to the dial tone. Desmond answered on the fourth ring. His voice was gruff, expecting me to continue the argument from the ballroom. "What do you want, Morgan?" he demanded, his tone thick with hostility. I let out a long, heavy sigh, making sure the microphone caught the sound of my manufactured defeat. I waited a few seconds before speaking, letting the silence stretch to build the illusion of reluctance. "You win, Desmond," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I let my words tremble slightly, as if the admission was physically painful. I could hear a sudden shift in the background noise. The rustling of fabric told me he had put me on speakerphone. Valerie was sitting right next to him, listening to my surrender. "What did you just say?" Desmond asked, his tone losing its harsh edge, replaced by greedy curiosity. "I said you win," I repeated, forcing a miserable exhaustion into my voice. "I came back to my room and sat here thinking about everything you said in the hallway." "You were right, Desmond. The medical logistics company is taking everything out of me. The expansion to London will require my undivided attention for the next 2 years, and I am already running on empty." I took another shaky breath. I cannot manage the $60 million estate on top of my corporate responsibilities. It is too much money and too much pressure. I do not understand complex market fluctuations like you and Connor do. If I try to handle it all from overseas, I am going to make a massive mistake and ruin the legacy my mother built. I need help. I need you to take over the domestic financial responsibilities just like you offered. The silence broke when the sickeningly sweet voice of my stepmother filled the speaker. "Oh, Morgan, sweetheart," Valerie cooed, her tone dripping with fake maternal affection. "We knew you would come to your senses once you looked at the situation logically. Your father and I have been so worried about the stress you carry. You are far too young to be burdened with generational wealth management alone. We are your family, and protecting you is our only priority." It took every ounce of self-control not to laugh at her blatant hypocrisy. The woman who watched her daughter steal my diamonds was now pretending to be my savior. I swallowed hard and maintained my defeated persona. "I know, Valerie," I murmured, sounding completely broken. "I am sorry for causing a scene at the party. I was overwhelmed and acting out of panic. I should have trusted that you and Desmond have my best interests at heart." Desmond cleared his throat, stepping back into the conversation with the smug satisfaction of a conqueror. "There is no need to apologize, Morgan," he said, his voice overflowing with magnanimous forgiveness. "Family members disagree sometimes, but we always come together to protect the estate. Connor was a bit harsh, but his heart is in the right place. We are a team, and the men in this family are equipped to handle the heavy lifting while you focus on your overseas project. All we need to do is formalize the arrangement so the banks know that Connor and I have the legal authority to execute trades and manage the collateral assets on your behalf." I nodded, ensuring my voice conveyed absolute submission. "I will sign the temporary asset management authorization," I told him, uttering the exact phrase his fraudulent document used. "I will not fight you anymore. I just want to get on my flight to London and leave this all behind me." "Excellent," Desmond replied, unable to hide the triumphant excitement vibrating in his chest. "Let us not waste any more time. I will call Harrison Pierce first thing in the morning and have him prepare the official binding copies in his office. We will meet there on Wednesday at 10 in the morning. That gives us 3 full days before your flight departs to finalize the transfers and ensure the financial transition is seamless. Does Wednesday at 10 work for your schedule?" "Wednesday at 10 is perfect," I agreed, letting a heavy sigh of relief filter through the phone. "Thank you, Desmond. Thank you for taking this burden off my hands. You have no idea how much better I feel knowing the $60 million trust is going to be under your direct control." "We will see you on Wednesday," sweetheart Valerie chimed in, her voice singing with greed. "Get some rest now. You have a big trip ahead." The line went dead. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the dark screen. The illusion of the exhausted, defeated daughter vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, calculating predator. I turned my attention back to my laptop screen, where the audio recording software displayed a continuous sound wave tracking the entire conversation. I clicked the stop button and saved the file to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. I had just secured undeniable high-definition audio proof of their premeditated intent to assume total control of my assets. Desmond had openly admitted on a recorded line that he and Connor planned to manage the collateral assets, explicitly acknowledging the trap hidden within the documents. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought they had broken my spirit and secured their $40 million margin loan. But all they had really done was provide the Federal Bureau of Investigation with a perfect, neatly packaged confession. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, a genuine smile breaking across my face. The false surrender was complete, and the countdown to their absolute destruction had begun. The morning sun crawled across the hardwood floor of my suite as I poured a second cup of black coffee. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating with an incoming encrypted file from the private investigation firm I had hired months ago. I opened the dossier and leaned back, watching the digital surveillance feed unfold. Desmond and Valerie had not wasted a single second after our phone call ended, believing they had finally broken my spirit and secured their access to the $60 million trust. They immediately shifted into a state of aggressive, premature celebration. The surveillance photos showed Desmond and Connor meeting for breakfast at an exclusive country club terrace, laughing loudly and raising mimosa glasses in a toast to their own perceived brilliance. They looked like men who had just conquered the world, completely unaware that they were actually dancing on the edge of a cliff. Valerie and Jasmine were equally active, wasting no time displaying their newfound sense of limitless wealth. The investigators intercepted a series of high-priority bookings made under Valerie's name. She had reserved a month-long stay at a seven-star luxury resort in Dubai, complete with private helicopter transfers and a dedicated personal shopping concierge. The itinerary detailed exclusive desert excursions and reservations at restaurants where the waiting list was usually 6 months long. Jasmine, on the other hand, was spotted leaving the flagship Rolex boutique in Buckhead, carrying 3 distinctively branded bags. My stepsister had apparently decided that stealing my mother vintage diamonds was not enough, and she needed to supplement her collection with modern watches. The sheer audacity of their spending was staggering, but what truly fascinated me was the financial mechanism they were using to fund this extravagant celebration. I clicked through the financial reports my team had compiled, detailing the recent credit inquiries tied to their names. Desmond and Connor were not using cash because they did not actually have any liquid assets of their own. Instead, they were leveraging heavily against the imminent approval of the $40 million margin loan. The investigators uncovered that Connor had taken out a massive short-term bridge loan with an exorbitant interest rate from a secondary lending institution. He used these high-interest funds to put a non-refundable cash down payment on a custom 80-foot Sunseeker yacht. The marine brokerage documents showed his signature scrawled across the dotted line, committing to a multi-million-dollar purchase contract that he could not possibly fulfill without my trust fund backing his credit. Connor was so blindly confident in his scheme that he had already named the vessel using a vulgar combination of his and Jasmine names. He had hired a captain and ordered a full custom interior refit, charging everything to newly opened credit lines that carried punishing penalties. For default, Valerie and Jasmine were operating on a similar delusion, maxing out premium credit cards that had been extended to them based on Desmond's fraudulent assurances of an incoming cash windfall. They were building an empire of sand fueled entirely by unsecured debt and their own bottomless greed. Every single swipe of their cards, every signature on a loan document, and every non-refundable deposit was a heavy iron shackle they were willingly locking around their own ankles. I sat in the quiet solitude of my office, watching the reports update in real time as the day progressed. A normal person might have felt a twinge of panic seeing their family members racking up millions of dollars in debt under the assumption that they were about to steal an inheritance. But I felt nothing but a cold, deep satisfaction. They were doing exactly what I needed them to do. Their reckless arrogance was the crucial ingredient required to ensure their absolute destruction. If they had simply waited for the ink to dry on the temporary asset management authorization before spending the money, they might have been able to mitigate the fallout when the trap finally snapped shut. But their greed made them impatient. They could not resist the urge to live like billionaires before they had actually stolen the billions. I understood the psychology of their behavior perfectly. Desmond had spent his entire life resenting my mother, success, and pretending to be a self-made man, while living in a house she paid for. Connor felt inadequate as a mediocre finance broker, trying to impress the old money elite of Atlanta. Their fragile egos demanded immediate validation. They needed to show the world that they were powerful and wealthy. Right now, even if that wealth was entirely imaginary, they were so blinded by their toxic entitlement that they never stopped to consider the possibility that I might be playing a game of my own. They looked at my compliance on the phone and saw weakness, because that is what they wanted to see. They underestimated me just as they had underestimated my mother before me. I watched a video clip sent by the investigators showing Connor walking out of a high-end car dealership, shaking hands with a salesman, while Jasmine sat in the passenger seat of a brand-new imported sports car. They drove off the lot without a care in the world, leaving a trail of signed financing agreements in their wake. The interest rates on these short-term loans were predatory, designed to trap desperate borrowers. Connor obviously planned to pay off all these high-interest bridges the moment he secured the $40 million margin loan using my trust as collateral. His entire financial future was perfectly balanced on the assumption that Wednesday morning would go exactly according to his plan. He had essentially pushed all his chips to the center of the poker table, betting his entire life on a hand he had already lost. I closed the encrypted file and slowly shut my laptop for the long night, knowing that tomorrow would seal their dark fate completely. The digital surveillance had confirmed every single assumption I ever made about their monumental stupidity. The premature celebration was in full swing right now, but the music would abruptly stop. Very soon, I poured my cold coffee down the drain and meticulously prepared for the execution that would permanently erase them from my life and safeguard my mother legacy forever. The digital surveillance files remained open on my screen as the sun set over Atlanta, but my focus had shifted to the true battlefield. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a direct line to Marcus, my lead attorney who was waiting in his downtown office alongside a team of financial architects and international banking experts. The time for observation had officially ended. It was time to trigger the financial maneuver that would legally and permanently sever my mother legacy from the greedy clutches of Desmond and Connor. I told Marcus to initiate the liquidation protocol immediately. There was no hesitation on the other end of the line, just the crisp sound of papers shuffling and accountants preparing to move an empire of wealth under the cover of darkness. I grabbed my coat and left the mansion, driving straight to the law firm. I walked into the conference room overlooking the glowing city skyline. The table was covered in stacks of legal binders and international wire forms. Marcus handed me a sleek black pen. "We are ready to proceed, Morgan," he said, his voice steady. "The original terms of your mother trust were designed to protect you from external manipulation, but they also included an emergency exit strategy. Because you are 31 years old and the primary beneficiary, you possess the legal authority to dissolve the domestic trust entirely before its maturation date, if you can prove a state of documented financial risk." I smiled coldly, looking down at the paperwork. Desmond thought he had discovered a brilliant loophole with his cross-collateralization scheme, but his arrogance blinded him to the fact that his actions provided the exact legal ammunition I needed. The audio recording of Desmond stating his intent to manage collateral assets, combined with the shell company filings and the $40 million margin loan application, constituted overwhelming proof of predatory financial risk. My mother anticipated that someone might try to steal her fortune, and she made sure I held the ultimate kill switch. I leaned over the table and began signing my name, transferring my authority into the waiting hands of my legal team. This was not a surrender like the one I had faked for Desmond on the phone. This was the deliberate, systematic dismantling of a $60 million domestic fortress. Once my signature hit the final page, the team went to work. The atmosphere in the room shifted into a state of intense, highly orchestrated urgency. The financial architects opened secure terminals, communicating directly with overnight trading desks and elite banking liaisons. The goal was to drain every single cent of the $60 million in stocks, bonds, and liquid cash before the sun came up, and to do it so quietly that no alarm bells would trigger in the domestic banking system until it was far too late. I sat in a leather chair and watched the digital monitors on the wall as my mother carefully curated portfolio was liquidated. Block by block, they sold off massive positions in blue-chip tech stocks and pharmaceutical shares, routing the proceeds through a complex series of domestic holding accounts to obscure the point of origin. The accountants worked with ruthless efficiency, liquidating mutual funds and cashing out municipal bonds, turning a vast, diversified fortune into pure liquid cash. It was a brutal financial maneuver, executed with surgical precision. I watched the numbers climbing on the screen as millions of dollars flooded into our secure staging accounts. 20 million, 35 million, 50 million. The sheer velocity of the liquidation would have given any traditional wealth manager a heart attack, but my team knew exactly what they were doing. They were racing against the clock, ensuring that every single domestic account tied to my name or the original trust was drained down to the absolute bottom, leaving nothing but dust and echoes. As the clock struck 3 in the morning, the final phase of the operation began. Holding $60 million in liquid cash within the United States was too vulnerable. If Desmond caught wind of the movement, he might attempt to file a desperate injunction to freeze the domestic transfers. The money needed to vanish completely from American soil and slip permanently out of United States jurisdiction. Marcus initiated the international wire transfers, directing the massive sum toward its final impenetrable destination. We were not just moving the money, we were locking it inside a fortress that no domestic court could ever breach. The destination was an irrevocable offshore blind trust located in Zurich, Switzerland. An irrevocable blind trust meant that once the assets were deposited, I legally relinquished direct managerial control to a specialized Swiss trustee, and because the trust was completely blind, I would have no knowledge of how the assets were specifically invested moving forward. This measure was the ultimate shield against any legal attack Desmond or Connor might mount. If they sued me to recover the collateral they believed they were owed, I could legally testify that I did not control the money and had no ability to retrieve it. Swiss banking laws provided an impenetrable wall of secrecy that absolutely refused to recognize civil judgments from American family courts or fraudulent shell companies. I watched the loading bar on the main monitor as the final international wire transfer processed. The routing codes flashed across the screen, carrying $60 million across the Atlantic Ocean, deep into the secured vaults of the Swiss financial system. The transfer status blinked from pending to complete. The primary domestic trust balance officially dropped to zero. Every secondary account dropped to zero. There was absolutely nothing left for them to steal. I let out a long breath, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. My mother legacy was finally safe, completely insulated from the toxic greed of the people sleeping in the mansion across town. Desmond and Connor were about to walk into Harrison Pierce's office, expecting to take control of an empire, but they were walking into a completely empty room. The financial trap was fully set and armed, waiting quietly in the dark for them to step blindly into its jaws. The digital glow of the international wire confirmation reflected in the dark windows of the conference room. But my legal team was not finished yet. Securing the $60 million in liquid cash was only the first half of the battlefield. Marcus slid a second stack of heavy leather binders across the polished mahogany table, pushing aside the empty coffee cups. The cash was safely locked away in Switzerland, but we still had an empire of concrete and steel sitting right here on American soil. My mother did not just build a medical logistics company, she also built a massive portfolio of commercial and residential real estate over 3 decades of relentless work. These properties were the physical monuments to her brilliance, and they were completely unmortgaged, owned free and clear, without a single cent of debt attached to them. Desmond and Connor knew exactly how valuable those deeds were. If their $40 million margin loan started to collapse and the bank came looking for collateral, they would absolutely try to pivot and offer up the physical real estate to save their own skins. I opened the first binder and looked at the list of properties my mother had acquired. There were sprawling logistics warehouses positioned near major interstate highways, highly lucrative retail spaces in Midtown Atlanta, and several luxury commercial high-rises that generated massive monthly rental income. But the crown jewel of the entire portfolio was the sprawling estate in Buckhead, the very same mansion where Desmond and Valerie were currently sleeping under imported silk sheets, dreaming about their newfound wealth. Connor and his shell company would view these hard assets as their ultimate backup plan. If the bank discovered the cash trust was inaccessible, Connor would desperately try to pledge these physical deeds to satisfy the margin requirements and keep his fraudulent real estate venture afloat. I looked at Marcus and told him I wanted every single square foot of property permanently removed from the board. I wanted to ensure that Desmond could not leverage a single brick of my mother legacy to fund his toxic lifestyle. Marcus nodded, his expression reflecting the same cold calculation that I felt in my chest. Transferring the deeds to another standard corporate entity or a domestic limited liability company would not provide the absolute protection we needed. If Desmond realized the assets had been moved, he might try to file a desperate civil injunction claiming fraudulent transfer, and a local judge might temporarily freeze the properties while the courts sorted out the mess. We needed a legal fortress that was completely immune to any civil litigation Desmond might attempt to weaponize. Marcus explained that the most impenetrable shield in American asset protection was an anonymous charitable foundation. By transferring the physical deeds into a registered nonprofit philanthropic organization, the assets would instantly become untouchable by commercial creditors or greedy family members. No bank in their right mind would ever attempt to seize hard assets from a legitimate medical charity to satisfy a defaulted margin loan belonging to a fraudulent shell company. It would be a public relations nightmare and an absolute legal impossibility. The legal team had been working diligently for weeks, preparing the vast amounts of paperwork required to establish the specific philanthropic entity. They handed me the formation documents for the new foundation. I looked at the designated title printed at the top of the charter and felt a deep surge of emotional validation. I had legally named the charity after my biological mother, ensuring that her true legacy would be forever preserved in the exact way she would have wanted. The foundation was strictly chartered to fund advanced medical research, provide critical supply chain logistics for underserved community clinics, and support healthcare initiatives across the entire state of Georgia. All the rental income generated by the commercial properties would bypass my personal accounts entirely and flow directly into the charity to fund these vital operations. Desmond had spent years trying to erase my mother memory from the mansion by replacing her photos with pictures of Valerie and Jasmine. But now my mother name was permanently etched into an indestructible philanthropic fortress that he could never tear down. I picked up the black pen again and began the meticulous process of signing over the warranty deeds. With every stroke of the pen, I was legally severing another piece of the real estate empire from the domestic trust. I transferred the deeds for the Midtown retail spaces, stripping away millions of dollars in commercial value. I transferred the logistics warehouses, ensuring that the core infrastructure of my company was protected by the charitable shield. And finally, Marcus handed me the deed to the Buckhead Mansion. I stared at the legal description of the property, picturing the grand marble staircase, the heavy oak doors, and the antique vanity where Jasmine had stood just a few hours ago stealing vintage diamonds. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, officially donating the multi-million-dollar estate to the charitable foundation. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face as the reality of that specific signature set in. Desmond and Valerie were currently asleep in the master bedroom of a house that no longer belonged to the family trust. They were completely oblivious to the fact that they were now effectively squatting inside a property owned entirely by a medical charity named after the woman they had betrayed. When the financial guillotine finally dropped, they would have absolutely no legal right to remain on the premises. The shell company that Connor had built was now completely and utterly hollow. There was no liquid cash sitting in domestic accounts. There were no commercial properties to pledge as backup collateral. There was no family mansion to leverage. There was nothing left but Connor's massive high-interest debts, his fraudulent $40 million loan application, and his boundless unearned arrogance. The second phase of the legal execution was officially complete. The physical assets were safely locked behind a wall of philanthropy, and the stage was perfectly set for the most devastating financial implosion my stepfamily could ever imagine. I handed the final deed back to Marcus and watched as the attorneys gathered the binders securing the documents that would guarantee their absolute ruin. The physical assets were secured, but there was one final string tying me to the parasites living in the Buckhead mansion. I sat across from Marcus as the dawn began to break over the Atlanta skyline, casting a pale gray light into the conference room. My legal team was packing up their briefcases, having successfully hidden a massive fortune behind an impenetrable wall of international trusts and philanthropic foundations. But I was not quite ready to leave the table. I opened my laptop and logged directly into the master dashboard of my primary banking institution. The screen illuminated my face as I navigated past the now empty investment portfolios and scrolled down to the active credit lines. There it was, the sprawling network of supplementary black cards that Desmond, Valerie, and Jasmine had been leeching off for the better part of 2 decades. My mother had originally authorized these secondary accounts out of a misguided sense of familial duty, hoping to provide Desmond with a comfortable standard of living while he supposedly managed the household. Instead, he had treated her generosity like an endless personal ATM, and he had happily extended that same unearned privilege to his mistress-turned-wife and her spoiled daughter. For years, I had silently monitored the monthly statements, watching as they drained hundreds of thousands of dollars on absolute frivolity. I clicked on the recent transaction history and felt a familiar wave of disgust wash over me. Valerie had just charged $50,000 to secure her luxury suite and helicopter transfers in Dubai. Jasmine had swiped her card at multiple designer boutiques earlier that afternoon, racking up staggering totals on imported leather goods and diamond watches. Desmond was using his card to cover the exorbitant membership fees at his elite country club and fund lavish dinners where he pretended to be a self-made titan of industry. They had never worked a single honest day in their entire lives, yet they swiped those heavy metal cards with the effortless arrogance of royalty. Under normal circumstances, any financial advisor would have demanded that I terminate these supplementary accounts the very second the trust was liquidated. It was the most logical step to prevent any further financial hemorrhaging. But logical does not always mean strategic, and my goal was not simply to stop them from spending my money. My goal was to maximize the psychological devastation when the trap finally closed around them. If I clicked the cancellation button right now, their accounts would freeze instantly. Valerie would wake up to a frantic email from her travel concierge explaining that the Dubai resort had rejected her deposit. Jasmine would go to buy another ridiculously expensive handbag tomorrow afternoon and suffer the minor embarrassment of a declined transaction. Desmond would find his morning mimosa tab bouncing at the country club. That minor disruption would serve as a massive blaring alarm bell. They would immediately realize something was wrong with the estate finances, and they would scramble to contact Harrison Pierce to investigate the blockage. They might even try to stall the Wednesday morning meeting or attempt to leverage the fraudulent margin loan through alternative dirty channels before I could finalize their destruction. I needed them to remain absolutely blind and completely comfortable in their delusion of victory. I needed them to keep spending wildly, to keep accumulating massive debts, and to walk into that law office on Wednesday morning feeling like absolute conquerors. So I did not cancel the cards. Instead, I initiated a specialized banking protocol that only top-tier wealth clients could access. I pulled out my phone and bypassed the standard customer service lines, dialing the direct private number for my dedicated elite banking liaison at the corporate headquarters. The liaison answered immediately, despite the early hour, his voice crisp and professional. I verified my identity using my secure passcodes and told him I needed to implement a highly specific delayed cancellation order across all supplementary credit accounts tied to my primary profile. I instructed him to place a hard, irreversible freeze on the cards belonging to Desmond, Valerie, and Jasmine. But I was very clear about the timing. The freeze was not to be executed today or tomorrow. I told the liaison to program the automated lockdown sequence to trigger on exactly Wednesday morning at exactly 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, down to the very second. The banker confirmed the request, typing rapidly on his end. He read the instructions back to me, verifying that all 3 secondary cards would remain fully active and flush with limitless credit until the exact moment the clock struck 10 on Wednesday morning. After that precise second, any attempted transaction would be instantly and permanently declined, with a mandatory confiscation code sent to the merchant. I thanked him and ended the call, setting my phone down on the polished wood of the conference table. A deep sense of poetic justice settled into my bones as I looked out the window at the waking city. On Wednesday morning at 10 o'clock, Desmond would be sitting across from me in a leather chair, pushing a fraudulent authorization document across the table. He would be expecting me to sign over $60 million. At that exact same moment, his entire financial existence would evaporate. Valerie would likely be sitting in a luxury spa, celebrating her imminent wealth, completely unaware that her card was about to bounce for a simple massage. Jasmine might be out shopping for more stolen diamonds, only to have the cashier cut her black card in half right in front of her face. The timing was a flawless, synchronized symphony of ruin. The credit trap was now fully armed and ticking quietly in the background. I closed my laptop and packed my bag, finally ready to leave the law firm. My flight to London was only a few days away, but the real departure, the complete and total severance from the parasites who had infected my life for so long, would happen right here in Atlanta. I walked out of the glass building into the cool morning air, knowing that every trap was set, every asset was protected, and every escape route for my stepfamily was permanently blocked. They would soon learn the true cost of stealing from my family legacy. Wednesday morning arrived with a heavy gray overcast that seemed to swallow the Atlanta skyline. But inside the plush corporate offices of Harrison Pierce, the atmosphere was radiating with a blinding artificial warmth. The law firm was located on the top floor of a prominent glass tower in the financial district. It was a space designed specifically to intimidate the weak and comfort the wealthy. The conference room we reserved was a cavernous space paneled in dark, rich mahogany. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below. A massive, polished wooden table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by heavy leather executive chairs. It was the kind of room where fortunes were typically built and destroyed with a single stroke of a pen. Today, it would serve as the perfect execution chamber. I stood in the hallway just outside the heavy glass doors for a few moments. I observed the scene unfolding inside before making my presence known. The room was practically vibrating with a toxic combination of nervous energy and unearned arrogance. Desmond was pacing back and forth near the windows, unable to sit still. His face was flushed with greedy excitement, and he kept checking his expensive watch every few seconds. He looked like a desperate gambler waiting for the final card to be dealt. He knew the jackpot was finally within his reach. Valerie was slouched comfortably in one of the oversized leather chairs. She was completely ignoring the gravity of a legal meeting. She casually dragged a crystal nail file across her manicured fingers. She acted as if she had already ascended to the absolute peak of high society. She was simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up to her new reality. At the far end of the table, Connor had taken it upon himself to dominate the physical and auditory space of the room. The 30-year-old finance bro was manspreading aggressively, taking up 2 chairs worth of space. He leaned back with his hands clasped behind his head. He loudly lectured Harrison Pierce on the future of commercial real estate investments. He used a barrage of meaningless corporate buzzwords to sound intelligent. He went on and on about leveraging secondary market trends and maximizing leverage yields. Desmond nodded along as if listening to a seasoned financial prophet. It was a pathetic display of toxic masculine ego trying to validate itself. Harrison sat rigidly in his chair, nodding along with a strained smile. He played the role of the obedient legal servant who had clearly been promised a lucrative cut of the spoils once the margin loan was fully secured. And then there was Jasmine. My stepsister sat next to her husband, posing for an imaginary camera. Draped elegantly around her neck, resting against her collarbone, was my late mother, vintage Cartier diamond necklace. It was the very same diamond necklace she had brazenly stolen from my private suite just a few nights ago. Jasmine touched the heavy stones repeatedly, running her fingers over the platinum settings. She had a sickening look of absolute entitlement on her face. She wore the stolen jewelry like a trophy. It was an open display of disrespect meant to remind me that they were taking everything I owned. She believed there was absolutely nothing I could do to stop them. I let out a slow, silent breath, letting the chill of the hallway settle into my bones. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped into the conference room. I did not carry a briefcase or a purse. My hands were completely empty. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that fit like modern armor. I projected an aura of absolute icy control. My heels clicked softly against the hardwood floor, drawing the immediate attention of everyone in the room. The loud, arrogant chatter died instantly the moment they saw me. Connor stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly. Valerie put down her nail file and sat up straight, trying to look dignified. Desmond stopped his frantic pacing. A wide, predatory smile stretched across his face. He hurried toward his designated chair at the head of the table. He gestured for me to take the seat directly opposite him. "Right on time," Morgan Desmond said. His voice dripped with fake paternal warmth. "We were just getting things organized. Please have a seat so we can get this minor administrative task out of the way. You have a big flight to catch, and we want to make sure you are completely stress-free before you head to the airport." I did not say a single word in response. I walked slowly to the end of the long mahogany table and took my seat. I maintained direct eye contact with Desmond the entire time. My posture was perfectly straight. My expression was completely unreadable. The silence in the room stretched out, becoming thick and suffocating. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background. It did nothing to cool the sudden nervous tension radiating from the other side of the table. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Her hand flew up to cover the diamond necklace, as if suddenly remembering she was wearing stolen property right in front of the rightful owner. She looked away, unable to maintain eye contact with me. Connor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. He tried to reassert his dominance by staring me down. His eyes betrayed a slight flicker of uncertainty at my chilling silence. I looked at the four of them, taking in their smug, confident faces. They truly believed they had won. They thought my empty hands and quiet demeanor were signs of total defeat. They thought the exhausted, broken daughter they had spoken to on the phone had arrived. They believed I was here to blindly hand over the keys to a $60 million kingdom. They had no idea that they were sitting in a room with a ghost. The empire they were trying to steal had already vanished into thin air. Harrison Pierce cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the room. He adjusted his designer tie and offered me a professional, sympathetic smile. It made my stomach turn. "Good morning," Morgan Harrison said. His voice was smooth and practiced. "Your father informed me that you have decided to sign the temporary asset management authorization before your departure to London. I have prepared all the necessary binding documents to facilitate the transition of managerial authority to Desmond and Connor." Harrison reached into his leather briefcase. He pulled out the exact same heavy, ornate folder that Desmond had presented to me at the anniversary gala. The crisp white papers inside were loaded with the hidden cross-collateralization clauses. They were designed to trap my entire trust fund. They would pledge it against Connor's fraudulent $40 million margin loan. Harrison placed his hand flat on top of the folder. He slid it slowly across the polished mahogany table. The heavy leather portfolio glided smoothly over the wood. It made a soft scraping sound before coming to a stop directly in front of me. The trap was officially set. All the moving parts of their malicious conspiracy had converged on this very table in this very room. They watched me with bated breath, expecting me to simply pick up the gold pen and surrender my mother life work to their insatiable greed. I looked down at the heavy leather portfolio resting on the polished mahogany surface. The gold pen lay perfectly aligned next to the signature line, waiting for my hand to claim it. Desmond leaned forward in his executive chair, resting his forearms on the table. His eyes were locked onto my fingers, anticipating the movement that would finally secure his massive, fraudulent margin loan. Go ahead, Morgan. He urged, his voice thick with a sickeningly fake warmth. Just sign on the dotted line, sweetheart. It is for your own good. It is for the protection of the entire family legacy. Once you sign those papers, you can finally relax and focus entirely on your overseas expansion without any of this heavy financial burden weighing you down. We have got everything under control from here on out. I did not move a single muscle. My hands remained perfectly still, resting comfortably in my lap beneath the table. The seconds ticked by, feeling like hours in the tense atmosphere of the conference room. Connor let out an exaggerated sigh, shifting his weight in his chair and rolling his eyes at my apparent hesitation. What is the holdup? Morgan Connor snapped, his arrogant finance bro persona fully engaged. The legal jargon is standard boilerplate corporate protection. Desmond and Harrison spent weeks making sure the structure was absolutely flawless. Just pick up the pen and sign the document so we can all get back to running our actual businesses. You are wasting highly valuable corporate time here. I slowly raised my gaze from the folder and looked directly into Connor's eyes. My expression remained completely devoid of emotion. I am not wasting time, Connor, I replied, my voice dropping to a cool, measured tone. I am simply exercising basic fiduciary diligence. Before I sign away the managerial rights to a $60 million financial empire, I want to see exactly what I'm handing over to you. I turned my attention back to the family lawyer who was sitting nervously next to the projector screen. Harrison, I want a complete and transparent visual confirmation of the current assets. Project the primary trust account balances onto the main conference room screen right now. I want a final audit before I put my name on that paper. Valerie let out a sharp, dramatic scoff from the other side of the table, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. Oh, for heaven's sake, Morgan! You are being completely paranoid, Valerie complained, her voice dripping with artificial exasperation. Harrison just printed those documents this morning. Nothing has changed since you received your last quarterly statement. You are just trying to create unnecessary drama because you cannot handle giving up control. Your father is trying to help you, and you are treating him like a common criminal. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Harrison, completely ignoring Valerie and her pathetic attempt at manipulation. I said I want to see the live account balances, Harrison. I repeated, my voice hardening into an undeniable command. Log into the master terminal and put the live data on that screen behind you. If you refuse to provide a final visual audit of my own trust fund right here and now, I will get up from this table, walk out of this glass building, and you will never get my signature on that authorization document. Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his expensive leather chair, looking nervously toward Desmond for guidance. The lawyer knew he was complicit in a massive fraudulent scheme, and my sudden demand for transparency clearly rattled his nerves. Desmond, however, remained absolutely confident in his own perceived brilliance. He truly believed the $60 million was sitting safely in the domestic accounts, just waiting to be harvested. Desmond offered a condescending chuckle and waved his hand dismissively at the lawyer. Humor her, Harrison, Desmond instructed, leaning back in his chair with a smug, triumphant smile. If seeing the numbers on a big screen is what it takes to make my daughter feel secure about her future, then show her the numbers. Let her see exactly how robust the estate is before we take over the reins. There are no secrets in this family, Morgan. We are completely transparent. Harrison nodded obediently, pulling his silver laptop closer to him and opening the master banking portal. He connected a small cable to the side of his computer, linking his screen directly to the massive digital projector mounted on the ceiling of the conference room. The large white screen on the wall flickered to life, casting a bright blue glow over the dark mahogany table. We watched as Harrison typed in his secure administrative credentials, his fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. He bypassed the standard security protocols using the executive access codes my mother had trusted him with over a decade ago. Jasmine leaned forward in her chair, touching the stolen vintage diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. She watched the screen with hungry, glittering eyes, eager to see the massive fortune that she believed would soon be funding her endless shopping sprees and luxury vacations. Connor smirked, crossing his arms, confident that he was about to see the massive collateral that would finally secure his $40 million margin loan. Desmond simply smiled, a portrait of a greedy man standing at the absolute finish line of his lifelong manipulative marathon. Harrison clicked the final authentication button and navigated to the primary domestic trust portal. The loading circle spun for a fraction of a second, processing the request through the bank's highly secure encrypted servers. Everyone in the room held their breath, waiting for the glorious display of generational wealth to materialize on the high-definition screen. The system chimed softly, and the page fully refreshed. The primary trust dashboard appeared, displaying the master account overview in bold black text against a stark white background. The room instantly plunged into a dead, horrifying silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The smug, triumphant smiles completely vanished from their faces, wiped away by a sudden crushing wave of absolute incomprehension. Right there in the center of the massive glowing screen, under the heading of Primary Domestic Trust, balance, the numbers read exactly $0.00, staring back at them like an insurmountable void that had swallowed their fraudulent future. The brutal, unstoppable force of consequence finally broke the spell of silence in the room. Connor shattered the quiet with a sudden, violent movement. He slammed both of his heavy fists down onto the polished mahogany table with such explosive force that the heavy leather portfolio jumped and slid across the wood. The sharp cracking sound echoed off the floor-to-ceiling windows, making Jasmine flinch and Harrison shrink back into his chair. The facade of the sophisticated finance bro dissolved, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, desperate man watching his imaginary empire crumble. His face turned a mottled shade of dark red, and the veins in his neck bulged against his tight silk collar. He leaned over the table, glaring at me with wild, frantic eyes. "Where did you put the money?" Morgan Connor screamed, his voice tearing through the conference room with unhinged ferocity. "What kind of sick game are you playing right now? Bring those balances back online immediately. That is my collateral. You have no right to touch those funds." His words hung in the air, exposing the absolute depth of his toxic entitlement. He spent months scheming to steal my inheritance, yet stood there screaming as if I robbed him of his own hard-earned wealth. He actually believed the $60 million was his collateral simply because he and Desmond had drawn up a fraudulent piece of paper. I did not flinch at his shouting. I did not blink. I slowly placed my hands on the armrests of my chair and pushed myself up from the table. The subtle scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor seemed louder than his screaming. I stood up to my full height, smoothing my tailored charcoal suit. I took complete physical and psychological control of the room. I looked down at Connor, making him feel small, insignificant, and entirely outmatched. I was not the naive sister-in-law he thought he could manipulate. I was a CEO who built a profitable logistics company from scratch, and I was about to show him what real corporate execution looked like. "You are asking me about your collateral, Connor?" I asked, my voice dropping into a low, icy register that cut right through his panicked, heavy breathing. "Let us talk about your collateral. Let us talk about the Delaware shell company that you and Desmond registered exactly 3 weeks ago. Let us talk about how you appointed yourselves as the sole managing directors of a completely hollow entity designed specifically to launder my mother legacy." Connor's jaw went slack, his angry red face suddenly draining of color as I laid out the exact details of his highly classified scheme. His eyes darted toward Desmond, who was still sitting frozen in his chair, unable to process the fact that their master plan had been completely intercepted. "You thought you could structure a $40 million margin loan through a major investment bank and use my trust fund to guarantee the debt without me finding out. You wanted to take my $60 million and pledge it against a toxic commercial real estate venture on the outskirts. A piece of land so heavily contaminated and crippled by stalled zoning permits that no legitimate bank would ever finance it without a bulletproof guarantor to absorb the inevitable default. I turned my attention to the family lawyer who was sweating profusely in his expensive suit. Harrison tried to avoid my gaze, looking down at his laptop screen, but there was nowhere for him to hide. "And you, Harrison?" I said, my words striking him like physical blows. "You abandoned your fiduciary duty the moment Desmond offered you a cut of the loan proceeds. You disguised a document as a temporary asset management authorization, but deliberately buried a cross-collateralization clause on page 47, hoping I would be too exhausted to read the fine print. You facilitated a massive, premeditated fraud, sitting there smiling while trying to hand me the pen that would sign away my future." Harrison swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing nervously, but he could not formulate a single word of defense. The evidence of his complicity was currently projected on the screen behind him in the form of zero balances. I shifted my gaze back to Connor, who had collapsed into his chair. The aggressive manspreading was gone. He sat hunched over, staring blankly at the polished wood. The terrifying reality of his situation was finally crashing down over him, crushing his fragile ego. I methodically dissected his illusion, leaving no room for escape. "I know exactly how you function, Connor," I told him, my voice echoing with clarity. "I know you do not have any actual liquidity of your own. I know you took out massive high-interest bridge loans from secondary lenders to fund your ridiculous lifestyle. I know you put a non-refundable cash down payment on an 80-foot Sunseeker yacht and named it after yourself and your greedy wife. You financed a billionaire lifestyle on the absolute assumption that my signature would clear your $40 million margin loan and wipe out your short-term debts by the end of the week." Connor's chest heaved as he struggled to draw air into his lungs. The sheer scope of the intelligence I had gathered completely paralyzed him. He realized that I had not just discovered his plan at the last minute. I had listened to Desmond lie on the phone, watched them celebrate their premature victory, monitored their reckless spending sprees, and waited patiently in the shadows while they tied the noose securely around their own necks. He looked at the projection screen again, seeing the devastating confirmation that his grand financial scheme had just been incinerated. There was no collateral to pledge to the investment bank. There was no safety net to catch him when the predatory lenders came knocking for their bridge loan repayments. There was no family mansion left to leverage, and no vintage diamonds that could cover the catastrophic deficits he had recklessly created. His entire identity as a successful finance broker was a complete fabrication built on stolen money that no longer existed. He was sitting in the middle of a burning room, and he had locked the doors from the inside. I watched the absolute despair settle over his features as his mind ran the calculations of his bankruptcy. "You thought you could gamble with the empire my mother built and walk away rich, but you forgot the most basic rule of corporate warfare. You never leverage an asset you do not control. Your $40 million dream is dead." The words hung in the air, heavy and final, settling over the room like a burial shroud. Before Connor could even attempt to process the magnitude of his absolute failure, the antique grandfather clock in the far corner of Harrison Pierce's opulent office began to chime. It was exactly 10 in the morning. The deep, resonant metallic bells echoed against the massive floor-to-ceiling glass walls, marking the precise hour of execution that I had meticulously scheduled with my elite banking liaison days ago. As the final heavy chime faded into the tense, suffocating silence, Connor's cell phone violently vibrated against the polished mahogany table. The sudden loud buzzing noise made everyone in the room flinch with anticipation, except for me. The device rattled against the wood like a warning siren. Connor stared at the glowing digital screen, his eyes wide with a brand new layer of fresh, unrelenting terror. The caller ID displayed the official name of the major commercial investment bank handling his fraudulent margin loan. He hesitated, his large hands shaking so severely he could barely summon the fine motor control required to swipe the screen and answer the incoming call. "Answer it, Connor," I commanded, my voice cold and completely unyielding. "Pick up the phone and put it on speaker," so we can all hear the glorious final results of your brilliant high-level financial expertise." He swallowed hard, a thick bead of sweat tracing down his pale temple, and pressed the green accept button with a trembling finger. A crisp, robotic-sounding female voice filled the massive conference room, cutting straight through the dead quiet air. "Mr. Davenport, this is the Automated Risk Management and Asset Recovery Division at the Central Investment Bank, calling to inform you of an immediate critical status change regarding your corporate portfolio." The voice was entirely devoid of human empathy, delivering the financial death sentence with brutal mechanical efficiency. "Our daily automated algorithmic sweep of your pledged collateral accounts has returned a verified balance of $0.00. Because the foundational cash assets backing your highly leveraged positions have been completely removed from our domestic banking architecture, your accounts have violently breached their mandatory maintenance margins. As a direct result, our risk management software has automatically triggered an immediate and non-negotiable margin call across all of your active trading and corporate credit lines." The automated voice paused for a fraction of a second, simulating a human breath, before delivering the fatal crushing blow. "You currently carry a massive unsecured debt deficit tied to predatory high-risk bridge loans and multiple pending real estate acquisitions. To immediately satisfy this severe uncollateralized margin deficit, the bank is initiating emergency administrative liquidation protocols. Effective as of this exact moment, all corporate accounts registered under your Delaware Shell Company have been permanently frozen. All incoming funds will be automatically intercepted and heavily redirected to cover the exposed institutional debt you have recklessly accumulated." Connor let out a strangled, guttural gasp, gripping the hard edges of the mahogany table as the robotic voice continued its relentless auditory assault, destroying his life piece by piece. "Furthermore, Mr. Davenport, the comprehensive cross-collateralization clauses embedded deep within your personal guarantee agreements are now fully active and operational. The bank is currently executing aggressive asset seizure protocols against your entire personal portfolio. Your primary residential mortgage has been flagged for immediate lien enforcement due to fraudulent application data. The luxury imported vehicles currently leased under your personal name are actively being flagged for rapid repossession by local recovery agents. Your non-refundable cash deposits on marine vessels, specifically the 80-foot Sunseeker yacht and all related foreign real estate acquisitions, have been legally intercepted and completely absorbed by our legal department to satisfy your outstanding corporate deficit. Please contact the Federal Fraud and Recovery Division immediately to arrange the peaceful surrender of your physical assets before we are forced to dispatch local law enforcement to assist with the collection." The automated message disconnected with a sharp, definitive click, leaving a loud dial tone that echoed endlessly in the perfectly silent room. Connor dropped his phone onto the table, burying his face in his trembling hands as he let out a pathetic, sobbing wail of absolute despair. The financial guillotine had dropped with flawless, bloody precision, severing him from everything he owned. His massive, insurmountable debts had instantly consumed his entire existence, leaving him homeless, carless, and utterly bankrupt in the span of a single 2-minute phone call. But the absolute destruction of his fake corporate empire was not the only brutal trap scheduled for 10 o'clock. Directly across the long table, Jasmine's expensive designer handbag began to buzz and vibrate uncontrollably against the wood. A rapid, relentless succession of shrill notification chimes pierced the quiet air, going off one after another in a chaotic symphony of financial ruin. Jasmine frantically dug her manicured nails into her clutch, pulling out her smartphone with violently shaking hands. Her digital screen was absolutely flooded with urgent text messages and aggressive app alerts from every single premium credit card company she had been actively leeching off for years. Alert transaction declined at luxury boutique. Alert account permanently frozen due to primary cardholder cancellation. Alert mandatory confiscation code triggered on your supplementary platinum card. Please surrender plastic to merchant immediately. The messages just kept pouring in, painting a vivid picture of her sudden catastrophic poverty. Jasmine scrolled through the endless cascading waterfall of red notification banners, her breathing turning into sharp, desperate, panicked gasps as her reality shattered. She realized her month-long luxury vacation to Dubai was canceled. Her private helicopter transfers were revoked, and her endless shopping sprees were permanently over. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with terrified, desperate tears, as she realized she was holding nothing but a stack of useless, deactivated plastic. She instinctively reached up to clutch the stolen vintage diamond necklace resting against her collarbone, realizing it was the only thing of value she had left. The delayed cancellation order I had placed with my banking liaison had executed flawlessly, cutting her off from the lifeblood of my mother wealth. At the exact same moment, her husband was stripped of his entire fraudulent future. They were left sitting there with absolutely nothing but the crushing, suffocating reality of their own boundless, insatiable greed and their impending total collapse. The crushing, suffocating reality of their impending total collapse hung heavy in the room, but Desmond was not a man who knew how to surrender gracefully. He had spent his entire life bullying his way out of corners and manipulating reality to suit his own selfish narrative. His initial shock rapidly boiled over into a blind, irrational rage that blinded him to his own vulnerability. Desmond slammed his hands on the table and pushed himself up from his chair, his face twisting into an ugly mask of pure hatred. "You think you have won, Morgan?" He spat, his voice trembling with a toxic mixture of fury and desperate denial. "You think you can just drain the family accounts and leave us holding the bag for this margin loan? You have made a massive legal error, and I am going to make you pay for it with every single thing you own." He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face, trying to summon the authoritative paternal presence that had successfully terrorized my mother for years. "I will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty." He threatened, his volume rising as he tried to convince himself of his own non-existent power. "I will drag you through the civil courts for the next 20 years of your miserable life. You maliciously liquidated a shared domestic trust without consulting the family, and you intentionally triggered a catastrophic margin call that destroyed my son-in-law. I will have a judge seize your medical logistics company as direct compensation. I will take your warehouses, your corporate accounts, and everything you have ever built to cover the damages you caused us today." I did not move a single muscle. I sat perfectly still and let his pathetic, desperate threats wash over me like a warm, harmless breeze. Desmond was so deeply entrenched in his delusion that he still believed this was a simple family dispute that could be resolved in a local civil court. He fundamentally did not understand the catastrophic magnitude of the forces I had just unleashed upon him. I slowly reached inside the breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit and pulled out a single, neatly folded sheet of crisp white paper. I placed it on the polished mahogany table and smoothed it out with my hands. "You are not going to sue me, Desmond," I said, my voice echoing with a chilling, absolute certainty. "You are not going to drag me through civil court, and you are certainly not going to touch a single delivery truck belonging to my logistics company. You are going to be far too busy trying to survive the full weight of the federal government." Desmond faltered, his outstretched finger slowly dropping as the word federal registered in his panicked mind. I tapped my index finger against the piece of paper resting on the table. "This is a time-stamped read receipt," I explained calmly, making sure every single person in the room could hear the executioner raising the axe. "It was automatically generated last night at exactly 11:45 Eastern Standard Time. I did not just spend the evening moving my mother fortune to Switzerland, Desmond. I also spent several hours compiling a highly detailed, comprehensive digital dossier containing every single piece of evidence regarding your fraudulent $40 million margin loan." Connor let out a weak whimpering sound from the end of the table, but I did not break eye contact with Desmond. "I included the shell company formation documents you registered in Delaware." I continued, my tone flat and merciless. I included the forged signature templates you plan to use on the temporary asset management authorization. I included the complete email chain between you and Connor discussing how you would use my $60 million trust fund as unverified collateral for a toxic commercial real estate venture. And most importantly, I included the final drafted contract with the deeply buried cross-collateralization clauses. Valerie let out a quiet, pitiful sob from the floor where she was slowly regaining consciousness. But nobody moved to comfort her. I forwarded that entire unredacted dossier to the regional director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. I stated, delivering the final absolute death blow to their existence. They received the files late last night, and they opened a formal federal inquiry early this morning. The agents at the FBI do not care about petty family disputes, Desmond. They care about massive coordinated wire fraud. The investigators at the SEC care about millions of dollars being manipulated through deceptive shell companies to defraud major domestic banking institutions. You committed multiple Class A federal felonies, and you left a paper trail a mile long. The sheer absolute finality of my words destroyed whatever tiny fraction of hope Desmond was still clinging to. His knees buckled slightly, and he fell heavily back into his leather executive chair, his chest heaving as he struggled to process the terrifying reality of federal prison. But the most violent reaction did not come from Desmond or Connor. It came from the family lawyer sitting quietly by the projector screen. Harrison Pierce had been silently listening to my entire explanation, and the gravity of his own complicity had just crashed down on his shoulders. Harrison knew the law better than anyone else in the room. He knew exactly what digital forensics entailed. I turned my gaze toward the lawyer, watching his professional facade disintegrate into pure raw terror. The digital dossier I submitted to the federal authorities was not just a collection of scanned documents. Harrison, I said, speaking directly to his deepest fears. My legal team extracted the original metadata from every single file Desmond and Connor sent me. We preserved the digital fingerprints, the routing numbers, and the specific IP addresses used to draft those fraudulent contracts. The FBI knows exactly which law firm authored the cross-collateralization clauses. They have the digital timestamps proving that you actively facilitated a $40 million bank fraud using your official legal credentials. Harrison's face turned completely white, a stark contrast to his dark, expensive suit. He understood immediately that he was not just facing a civil malpractice lawsuit or a slap on the wrist from the State Bar Association. He was going to be officially disbarred, publicly disgraced, and indicted as a primary co-conspirator in a massive federal racketeering case. The realization that his entire prestigious legal career was over and that he would likely spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary broke him completely. Harrison tried to stand up, but his legs refused to support his weight. His hand knocked against his heavy leather briefcase resting on the edge of the table. The briefcase tumbled off the mahogany surface and slammed onto the hardwood floor, spilling confidential client files and expensive pens all over the room. Harrison dropped to his knees beside the spilled documents, his hands shaking violently as he stared blankly at the scattered papers. He did not try to pick them up. He just knelt there, letting out soft, ragged breaths of absolute defeat. The powerful attorney who had smugly slid the fraudulent folder across the table just minutes ago was now a broken, empty shell of a man waiting for federal agents to arrive and place him in handcuffs. The heavy silence in the conference room shattered, not by me, but by the visceral, ugly sound of self-preservation. The threat of federal prison has a unique way of dissolving false loyalty. There is no honor among thieves, and there is certainly no genuine affection in a family built entirely on a foundation of parasitic greed. I watched as the polished, sophisticated masks they had worn for years melted away in a matter of seconds, leaving behind nothing but desperate feral animals trapped in a cage of their own making. Harrison was still kneeling on the floor, surrounded by his spilled legal documents, too paralyzed by his own impending disbarment to intervene, as the room descended into total anarchy. Connor was the first to snap completely under the pressure. The reality of the federal indictment loomed over his head like a suffocating dark cloud. He realized with horrifying clarity that his name was listed as the primary managing director on all the shell company filings. He was the one whose signature was on the fraudulent applications submitted to the commercial investment bank. The liability rested squarely on his broad shoulders. He let out a primal scream of rage and lunged across the wide mahogany table, grabbing Desmond by the lapels of his expensive tailored tuxedo jacket. "You promised me this was foolproof!" Connor screamed, spit flying from his lips as he shook the older man violently. "You swore the money was sitting right there waiting for us to take it. You told me she was a stupid, naive girl who would sign anything we put in front of her. You set me up, Desmond. You set me up to take the fall for a massive federal bank fraud while you tried to walk away clean and leave me holding the debt." Desmond shoved Connor away, his own panic bubbling over into absolute, uncontrollable rage. He stumbled back against the glass windows, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger at his son-in-law. "Do not put this on me, you arrogant little fool!" Desmond roared, his voice cracking with desperation. "You were the one who got greedy before the deal was even done. You were the one who took out millions in high-interest bridge loans to buy a luxury yacht before the ink was even dry on the collateral documents. You thought you were a brilliant financial genius playing in the big leagues, but you were just a pathetic amateur playing with fire. You ruined this family with your stupid, reckless spending and your massive ego." The vicious shouting match was abruptly interrupted by a low, pitiful groaning sound coming from the floor. Valerie was slowly regaining consciousness, pulling herself up against the heavy metal base of her executive leather chair. Her perfect designer hair was disheveled, and her expensive makeup was smeared across her pale, sweaty face. She blinked in confusion for a fleeting moment before the crushing reality of her financial ruin came rushing back into her mind. She looked at Desmond and then turned her gaze toward Connor, her eyes widening with a frantic feral desperation. "My credit cards!" Valerie shrieked, her voice hitting a piercing, hysterical pitch. "The resort in Dubai just sent an automated cancellation notice to my phone right before I passed out. All my accounts are permanently frozen." "What did you do, Connor? You promised us an empire, and now I am completely broke." She scrambled to her feet, her designer heels slipping on the hardwood floor, and lunged at her son-in-law. She began pounding her manicured fists against his chest in a blind panic. "You lost my house. You lost my luxurious lifestyle. You ruined absolutely everything," Valerie wailed, acting like a petulant toddler who had just had her favorite toy violently snatched away. Connor pushed her away roughly, shouting at her to shut up because a cancelled luxury vacation was absolutely nothing compared to the 10 years he was about to spend locked inside a federal penitentiary. The room devolved into a chaotic screaming match of bitter accusations and vicious blame. They were tearing each other apart right in front of my eyes, destroying their own toxic family unit faster and more thoroughly than any legal team ever could. I simply stood there like a stone statue and watched the beautiful, violent implosion of their dynamic. Amidst the screaming and the crying, my eyes locked onto Jasmine. My stepsister was backed into the far corner of the room, trembling uncontrollably against the mahogany paneling. She was not screaming or fighting like her parents. She was staring blankly at the floor, her breathing shallow and erratic. Her smartphone was still clutched tightly in her hand, its screen dark after delivering the fatal news of her deactivated credit lines and ruined shopping sprees. She slowly looked up and met my gaze across the room. The pure, unadulterated terror swimming in her eyes was absolutely intoxicating to witness. She realized that her arrogant husband was going to federal prison. She realized that her mother was completely broke and that her stepfather was facing a massive indictment. But most importantly, she realized that she was currently standing in a law office wearing highly identifiable stolen property directly around her neck. The vintage Cartier diamond necklace suddenly felt like a burning, heavy chain against her collarbone. Jasmine's hands flew up to the back of her neck, her fingers trembling so violently that she could barely grasp the intricate platinum clasp. She was panting heavily, sobbing quietly as she clawed at the jewelry, desperate to remove the physical evidence of her own blatant thievery. Her sharp manicured nails scratched aggressively against her own skin, leaving faint red marks on her neck as she fumbled blindly with the lock. She finally managed to undo the clasp, the heavy, glittering diamonds sliding off her skin and pooling into her shaking palms. Jasmine stumbled forward, her knees weak and unsteady, taking slow, hesitant steps toward my end of the table. The arrogant, entitled girl who had smirked at me in my private suite was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified shell. She held her hands out, offering the glittering necklace back to me like a desperate offering of peace. "Morgan, please!" Jasmine begged, her voice a pathetic, whining whisper that barely cut through the shouting of her parents. "Please take it back. I am so sorry. I never meant to steal it, I was just borrowing it. Like I said. Please do not tell the federal agents about the diamonds. I will do anything you want. Just please take it back and forgive me." I looked down at her shaking hands and the beautiful, expensive jewelry resting in her sweaty palms. I did not reach out to take it. I kept my arms firmly crossed over my chest and let a cold, merciless smile spread slowly across my face. I looked deeply into her terrified, pleading eyes, watching her soul completely shatter under the unbearable weight of her own actions. I shook my head slowly, letting the agonizing silence stretch for a long, torturous moment between us. "Keep it, Jasmine," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and completely devoid of any human sympathy. "I want you to have it. You are going to need something nice to wear to your husband's sentencing hearing." 3 days later, the atmosphere inside the first-class VIP lounge at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I had left behind at the law firm. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, blending perfectly with the quiet murmur of elite travelers waiting for their international departures. I sat comfortably in a plush velvet armchair, tucked away in a private corner overlooking the sprawling tarmac. The morning sun reflected off the sleek silver wings of the massive commercial jets, preparing for their transatlantic flights. My posture was completely relaxed, and the heavy burden I had carried for years was permanently lifted from my shoulders. A waiter in a crisp white shirt silently approached my table and placed a fresh glass of vintage champagne next to my boarding pass. I picked up the delicate crystal flute and took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the cool, crisp liquid wash away the remaining shadows of my stepfamily. The taste of absolute freedom and total victory was incredibly sweet. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of silent observation. My private investigators had kept me fully updated on the devastating fallout radiating from Harrison Pierce conference room. The federal machinery had moved with terrifying speed, completely dismantling the fraudulent empire Connor and Desmond had tried to build. But right now, in this quiet, luxurious sanctuary, none of that noise could reach me. My primary phone was turned off and securely packed inside my designer carry-on bag. The only device sitting on the table next to my champagne was a cheap, disposable burner phone I had purchased weeks ago for this exact moment. I knew he would call. The psychology of a cornered manipulator dictated that he would eventually exhaust every other option and come crawling back to the very person he tried to destroy, hoping for a miraculous rescue. I just had to wait for the federal pressure to break his spirit completely. Right on schedule, the cheap plastic burner phone began to vibrate against the glass tabletop. The harsh buzzing sound interrupted the tranquil atmosphere of the VIP lounge. I looked down at the small digital screen. It displayed an unknown caller ID, but there was absolutely no mystery about who was on the other end of the line. I took another leisurely sip of my champagne, savoring the moment before slowly picking up the device. I pressed the green button and raised the phone to my ear without saying a single word. I simply waited, listening to the heavy, ragged breathing echoing through the speaker. "Morgan, please." Desmond begged, his voice entirely stripped of its usual arrogance and commanding authority. He sounded like a hollow, broken shell of a man. The smooth, charming tone he used to manipulate Atlanta high society was completely gone, replaced by a wet, suffocating panic. He was openly weeping, his breath hitching and catching in his throat as he struggled to formulate a coherent sentence. "Morgan, are you there? Please tell me you are there. I need your help right now. You have to help me." I remained perfectly silent, leaning back into the velvet armchair and watching a luggage cart drive across the tarmac outside my window. My continued silence pushed his panic into overdrive. Desmond began to babble, his words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush. "They are here, Morgan," he cried, his voice cracking with pure, raw terror. "The federal agents are here at the mansion. They showed up at dawn with black SUVs and tactical gear. They kicked the front doors wide open, and they have a warrant. Valerie is locked in the bathroom, having a complete nervous breakdown, and they have agents tearing apart my private study right now. They are boxing up every single financial document, every computer, every hard drive in the entire house. They even seized the title to the cars. They told me the property is owned by a charitable foundation and we are trespassing. Please, Morgan, you have to call them off. You have to call the banks and the Securities and Exchange Commission and tell them it was all a huge misunderstanding. Tell them we had a verbal agreement about the temporary asset management authorization and the margin loan. Tell them Connor acted alone and I had no idea about the cross-collateralization clauses. You have the power to stop this federal raid right now. If you just make one phone call and explain that the trust fund transfer was a miscommunication, they might drop the charges. I am 58 years old, Morgan. I cannot go to federal prison. I will not survive it. I am going to lose absolutely everything. My reputation is destroyed and they are going to put me in handcuffs and walk me out my own front door in front of the entire neighborhood. Please, I am begging you as the man who raised you, do not let them take me away." I listened to his pathetic begging, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the man who had plotted to steal my mother's $60 million legacy. He was not crying because he felt remorse for his actions or guilt for attempting to ruin my life. He was only crying because he had been caught and the consequences were finally crashing down on his head. He wanted me to commit perjury, to lie to federal investigators and risk my own freedom just to save him from the mess he orchestrated. The sheer delusion required to make such a request proved that he had not learned a single thing. He still believed he could manipulate me into sacrificing myself for his comfort. I took a deep, slow breath, the cool air conditioning of the lounge contrasting sharply with the sweaty desperation pouring through the phone speaker. Desmond had spent decades acting like the king of a castle. He did not build spending money, he did not earn, and treating me like an obstacle to be managed. Now, at 58 years old, he was stripped of his stolen armor and left entirely naked before the law. He was facing the absolute destruction of his identity, and there was no supplementary credit card or fraudulent contract that could buy his way out of a federal criminal indictment. I sat perfectly still and let his frantic sobbing fill the speaker. For 20 years, this man had walked through my mother's house as if he owned the very air we breathed. He had worn his unearned authority like a crown and used his fake paternal charm to manipulate everyone around him. Now that crown was shattered and he was reduced to a crying, trembling mess, begging the stepdaughter he had tried to destroy to save him from federal agents. The sheer audacity of his request was almost poetic. He honestly believed that if he cried hard enough, I would suddenly forget the cross, collateralization clauses, the forged signatures, and the $40 million margin loan he tried to strap to my back. He thought the illusion of family loyalty would somehow override his blatant attempt to commit massive financial fraud. I took one final sip of my champagne, placing the crystal flute gently back onto the glass table. I let the silence stretch for another 10 seconds, making him wait in absolute agony, while the FBI agents likely tore his fraudulent life apart in the background. "Desmond," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of a single ounce of pity. "Your entire life has been a masterclass in parasitic survival, but your luck has officially run out. You cannot charm your way out of a federal indictment, and I am certainly not going to commit perjury to save you from the jail cell you built with your own 2 hands. While my mother was dying, you counted the days until you could take her empire. You paced the hospital hallways pretending to grieve while you were actually just doing the math on her life insurance policies and plotting how to move your mistress into her bedroom. You thought you could do the exact same thing to me. You thought I was just a naive extension of her wealth, a minor obstacle standing between you and absolute control. I leaned forward slightly, my eyes fixed on the massive commercial jets taxiing across the runway outside the lounge window. I didn't steal anything from you, Desmond. I continued, making sure every word struck him like a physical blow. I did not take your house because you never owned it. I did not empty your bank accounts because that money was never yours to spend. I did not ruin your son-in-law because he was the one who fraudulently applied for a $40 million margin loan. All I did was step out of the way. I simply removed my mother legacy from the table, and I just let you drown in the consequences of your own greed. You built a house of cards, and you handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation the match to burn it down. You are 58 years old, Desmond, and you are finally going to learn what it means to actually earn something, even if that something is a federal prison sentence. Good luck with the feds. I pulled the burner phone away from my ear, ignoring the fresh wave of hysterical screaming and begging that erupted from the speaker. I pressed the red button and cut the connection permanently, severing the final toxic thread that tied me to Desmond and his family. The sudden silence was beautiful. I removed the plastic back panel of the cheap phone and pulled out the small prepaid SIM card. I placed it between my thumb and index finger and snapped it cleanly in half, throwing the broken pieces into the trash can next to my velvet armchair. They could scream, they could cry, and they could blame me for their destruction, all they wanted, but they would never be able to reach me again. The empire they tried to steal was safe, and their fraudulent existence was completely eradicated. A soft chime echoed through the first-class lounge, followed by an elegant voice announcing the final boarding call for my direct flight to London. I picked up my designer carry-on bag and walked toward the departure gate with my head held high. I was not running away from a broken family. I was walking confidently toward a massive international expansion of my own logistics company. The wealth my mother left me was secure behind an impenetrable wall of philanthropy and international trusts, but my true power came from my own relentless ambition. I handed my passport to the gate agent, offering a polite smile as she welcomed me aboard. As I walked down the jet bridge, I felt a profound sense of absolute liberation. I had faced the worst kind of betrayal, and I had not just survived it, I had completely conquered it. If you are listening to this story right now, I want you to remember one crucial thing about dealing with toxic people, especially when they hide behind the title of family. Blood does not give anyone the right to manipulate your future or drain your resources. There will always be people who look at your hard work and see nothing but an opportunity for their own unearned gain. They will use guilt, they will use gaslighting, and they will use fake affection to try and trick you into handing over the keys to your kingdom. You have to be smart enough to see through the illusion and ruthless enough to protect what belongs to you. Knowing your worth is only the first step. Defending your worth with absolute unwavering boundaries is what actually keeps you safe. Never let anyone rush you into signing away your rights, and never ignore the warning signs when someone tries to isolate your assets. True family will support your independence, not scheme to control it. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is simply step out of the way and let toxic people fall into the very traps they set for you. If my journey of protecting my mother legacy and dismantling my step-family greedy empire resonated with you, please take a moment to hit the like button. Share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to draw a hard line against manipulative relatives who tried to take advantage of your success? How did you secure your own peace and protect your future from their toxicity? Your stories inspire others to stand strong and refuse to be victimized by predatory people. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of ultimate justice and personal empowerment. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. Remember to always trust your instincts, guard your empire fiercely, and let the perpetrators of betrayal face the full brutal weight of their own consequences. The greatest lesson from this ordeal is that true power lies in silent preparation and unwavering boundaries. Toxic people often mistake calmness for weakness, assuming that loud threats and public pressure will force you to surrender your worth. But real strength does not need to scream. It only needs to observe, calculate, and act with precision. Blood relations do not give anyone a free pass to exploit your hard work or drain your resources. Protecting yourself means trusting your instincts over fake family loyalty. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply stepping aside and letting greedy people destroy themselves completely. If you learned something valuable from this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful journeys of personal justice.